Good morning, dear children. After winding up with the first chapter, management, today we begin with the second chapter of the same book of BST, that is Principles of Management. We already know now what management is all about. We know the definition of management. We can easily define management. But what are principles? How can we define principles? I am not talking about principles of management. I am just talking about the literal word. What do you understand by the word principles? Principle refers to a statement that reflects the fundamental truth about a phenomenon. Then, what are management principles? Management principles are just the broad and general guidelines which help the manager of any organization, which guide the managers of any organization for taking right decisions, and they also guide the behavior of the managers towards the employees. And yes, management principles are also different from the principles of science. This is something we've already discussed in the first chapter. The principles of science are different from principles of management. Principles of management are very flexible. They can be modified. They can be changed according to situations. Why? Because they are applied on human beings in an organization. Whereas the principles of science, they are rigid. They cannot be modified. They cannot be applied with somebody's own creativity. Like, for example, nobody can change Archimedes' principle. Nobody can change Newton's law. Nobody can change, any other principle of science. They have to be applied as they are. They have to be applied in their absolute or static manner. Whereas management principles, they can be applied with a manager's creativity. They are flexible, they can be changed, but principles of science cannot be changed. Similarly, principles of management, as I said, they can be modified depending upon the situation, whereas the principles of science, they do not change according to situations. So you would, this is also a 1-mark board question. What is the difference between a management principle and the principles of science? So now I hope you can easily define the principles of management. Principles of management are broad and general guidelines which guide the managers or which help the managers in taking right decisions, and they also guide the behavior of managers. So what are the features of principles of management? We begin with the first topic of this chapter, features. The first feature of principles of management are they have a universal application. They have a universal validity. They are applied everywhere. The principles of management have a universal application, which can also be written as the principles of management are universal in nature. That means they can be applied to all types of organizations irrespective of their size and nature. You can also write down the word pervasive, which we also did as characteristics of management. Like, management is all pervasive, applied everywhere to all types of organizations. Similarly, principles of management also have a universal application. We can also use the word pervasive. Principles of management are pervasive in nature, be it a large organization, small, depending upon size and nature, manufacturing, non-manufacturing, they are applied everywhere. As I said, they guide the behavior of the managers. The second feature of principles of management is they are general guidelines. When I say these are general guidelines, it means that they just provide the guidelines. They just guide the managers how to solve a particular situation. They do not provide ready-made solution to any problem. In your NCERT, you will come across a word that these principles of management, they do not give straight jacket solution. I repeat the word, straight jacket solution, which means that these principles help in solving a problem. They guide the managers in solving a problem. Rather, they do not give a ready-made solution for any problem. The third feature of principles of management is that they are formed by practice and experiments. Now, children, the principles of management were not developed overnight. They were proper observations and experiments which were conducted before developing them. Like principles of science, even they were not developed overnight. Various experiments were done by scientists. There were so many continuous observations, and then we came to conclusions of those principles. Similarly, even principles of management are formed by practice and experimentation. Therefore, they are evolutionary in nature. You can also write down that they are evolutionary in nature. The fourth feature of principles of management is flexibility. Principles of management are flexible in a way that they can be applied differently under different situations as per the requirement. In order to adapt the changes, a manager always needs to make certain changes in these principles of management. These principles are not as rigid as the principles of science are, because there can be some changes made in application of these principles according to the requirement of the company. They are not set of rigid statements. These can be modified by managers who are using them. This feature is flexibility for principles of management. The next feature, children, for principles of management is principles of management are mainly behavioral. As I told you earlier, that principles of management are general guidelines which guide the behavior of the managers, right? So, management principles are formed to guide and influence the behavior of employees. These principles insist on improving relationships. I repeat, these principles insist on improving relationships between superiors, subordinates, and rather all members of the organization. They also establish relations between human and material resources. Hence, we can say that principles of management are mainly behavioral in nature. The next feature, children, for principles of management is that these principles of management, they develop, they establish a cause and effect relationship. Now, this single point has often been used as a 3-mark board question, wherein you only have to explain this feature of principles of management. So, what is cause and what is effect? You need to understand here. Now, let us consider there could be many problems in an organization. For example, the workers might go on strike. The productivity could not be increased because the workers are not motivated enough. The targets, the objectives of the organization are not being completed effectively and efficiently, and there could be n number of problems in an organization. So let us take any particular problem to which a manager applied a certain principle. Do not get worried about what principles I'm talking about. That we'll cover later. It's just that a manager used one certain principle to solve one particular problem. So the application of that principle becomes the cause. And after the application of that principle to a particular problem, there would be a result, and that result would either be positive or negative. So it just means that application of a principle would create a result which can be either positive or negative. Hence, you just have to write down that principles of management create a relationship between the application of a principle and the result or the outcome that would create. Hence, the result becomes the effect and the application of that principle becomes the cause. So these principles of management, they create a relationship between cause and effect. This is the next feature of principles of management. The last feature of principles of management is contingent. Now here, children, contingent simply means that the principles of management are dependent upon situations that are prevailing in the organization. The application of principles of management depends upon the nature of the organization. The application of principles has to be changed with the change in situation. For example, although you'll study it later, there is one principle, and that principle is of team spirit. So, team spirit is a principle that needs to be applied by a manager in the organization. But this principle of team spirit can be applicable only in those organizations which require group work, which requires teamwork. Whereas this principle will be of no use where the work is done by individuals. The work is not done by a group. Hence, the principles of situation are contingent, means they are dependent upon the situations that are prevailing in the organization. So we have all the features of management. I have features of principles of management here. Let's revise them all together. First, we repeat what are principles of management. Principles of management are general guidelines which guide the behavior of managers. They guide the behavior of managers towards the employees working in an organization. And they not only guide the behavior children, rather they help the managers in taking right decisions for the organization. So these features are important because again, you will get case studies for either 3, 4, 5 or 6. And not only this, now since the board question paper, the BST board question paper has changed the pattern, wherein from question number 1 to question number 20 you have MCQs. So you must know the keywords for each feature because you may be asked to identify any feature for 1 mark. So universal application. Principles of management are universally valid. They can be applied to any organization. Hence, you can also write down they're all pervasive in nature. They are general guidelines. They just guide how to solve a problem. They do not give a ready-made solution. They are formed by practice and experiments. They were not developed overnight. Various experiments were conducted. Various observations were done before developing them. They are flexible. They can be applied differently in different conditions. You can modify them according to the changes. They are mainly behavioral because they guide the behavior of the employees. Not only this, also because they are applied on human beings, they guide the behavior of they are applied on human beings. They guide the behavior of human beings. Hence, we can call them, they are mainly behavioral. Cause and effect relationship. A relationship is developed by principles of management through its application and the result it would create. And the last is contingent, which means they are dependent upon the situations that are prevailing in the organization. Whatever is the situation, you'll apply the principle accordingly. Thank you.